My wife cheated on me with her business partner, thinking he'd leave his wife for her. Now he's cut her off, and she wants me back, but I've moved. I always thought our marriage was built on mutual trust and shared ambition. For over a decade, my wife, Laura, and I had navigated the highs and lows of life together. We built a successful business, raised a family, and celebrated our achievements side by side. I poured my heart and soul into our venture, believing that our love and partnership would always be the backbone of everything we did. But nothing could have prepared me for the day that shattered every illusion I had held dear. It started with subtle changes, small hints that something wasn't right. Laura, who had always been attentive and warm, began to grow distant. Late-night phone calls became more frequent, and I noticed the soft glow of her screen illuminating her face long after our kids had gone to bed. At first, I brushed it off as the stress of managing a growing business. But as the weeks turned into months, the distance between us widened, and I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was amiss. One crisp autumn evening, I arrived at our home earlier than usual after closing an important deal. The silence that greeted me was unsettling. Instead of the comforting hum of family life, there was a heavy stillness. I found Laura in our study, seated at her desk with her laptop open. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, and her face was etched with a look of confliction I hadn't seen in years. When she saw me, her startled expression quickly shifted into something guarded, almost as if she were expecting me, but not in the way I hoped. "Hi, John," she said softly, her tone cool and detached. "I didn't hear you come in." I set my briefcase down and moved closer, trying to catch a glimpse of what she was reading. It was then that I noticed a series of messages on her screen, texts that were clearly not meant for me. My heart began to race as I read the words. "I can't wait to see you tonight. I need to be with you, forever," and other intimate declarations that belonged to someone else entirely. The messages were from someone named Mark, our business partner, yes, the very man I had trusted, who had been by our side through thick and thin. A shock so profound washed over me that for a moment, I felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath my feet. My mind reeled, unable to comprehend how Laura, the woman I had loved and trusted unconditionally, could betray me with someone who shared not only our business but our dreams. I silently closed the laptop, my fingers trembling as I picked it up. The reality of the situation sank in like a slow poison. That night, I confronted her. The confrontation was raw and heart-wrenching. In the dim light of our living room, the weight of the betrayal hung heavily between us. "How long?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. Tears welled in her eyes as she hesitated before answering. I thought I had found something real," she said, her voice breaking. "Mark made me feel desired, like I was finally understood. I didn't plan for this to hurt you." "Hurt me." Those two words echoed in my mind as I struggled to reconcile the life we'd built together with the reality of her infidelity. I recalled all the long hours spent nurturing our business, the sacrifices I had made, and the promises we had made to each other. To always be honest, to always fight for our love. Now, those promises lay in ruins, scattered like the shattered remnants of a once perfect dream. For weeks, I wandered through a fog of disbelief and heartbreak. Every corner of our home reminded me of happier times, when trust was unchallenged and love was unconditional. I questioned every conversation, every smile, every seemingly insignificant moment, wondering when the cracks had begun to show. My mind was in turmoil, and I could feel the foundations of our marriage crumbling beneath me. Then, as if the universe wanted to add insult to injury, Mark suddenly cut all ties with Laura. One day, I received a terse email from him, a few curt sentences apologizing for the fallout and declaring that he had no interest in pursuing any further involvement. Mark's decision confirmed what I already suspected. Laura's affair had been nothing more than a fleeting indulgence for him. He had seen her as an opportunity, a temporary escape from his own commitments, and once that was over, he had moved on without a backward glance. When Laura learned of Mark's decision, her demeanor shifted once again. The confident, almost defiant glimmer in her eyes was replaced by desperation and regret. Late-night phone calls turned into frantic pleas for reconciliation. She began to insist that she wanted to fix our marriage, that she was willing to do anything to earn back my trust. "John, I made a terrible mistake," she pleaded one evening, her voice choked with tears. "I was foolish to think that he would leave his wife for me. I'm lost without you." Her words, though heavy with regret, felt like a cruel twist of fate. The very person who had betrayed me now wanted to come back, as if the damage could be undone with a few apologies. But the truth was, the wound was too deep. I had moved on emotionally, even if I hadn't yet fully let go of the pain. I found myself questioning if I could ever trust her again, if our love was something that could survive such betrayal. I spent many sleepless nights wrestling with conflicting emotions, anger, sorrow, and a lingering hope for redemption. My heart was torn between the memories of our once shared happiness and the harsh reality of her infidelity. I knew that forgiveness wasn't a simple act, it required rebuilding trust from the shattered remains of a bond that had been violated. As the days turned into weeks, I began to notice a subtle shift within myself. The initial shock and overwhelming hurt started to recede, replaced by a quiet determination to reclaim my sense of self. I immersed myself in my work, finding solace in the familiarity of our business, and in the support of friends who reminded me of my worth. Slowly, I began to accept that some betrayals, however painful, force us to confront uncomfortable truths about our relationships and our own resilience. In the midst of all this turmoil, Laura's desperate attempts to mend our marriage grew more frequent. She would call, text, and even show up unannounced at my office with tear-stained apologies and promises of change. But each time, I found myself hesitating, feeling the weight of her betrayal. I couldn't help but wonder if she was truly remorseful or if she was merely clinging to a past that could never be restored. By the end of that tumultuous period, I had come to a stark realization: some wounds run too deep to heal completely. While a part of me still mourned the loss of the trust we once shared, I had also learned that I deserved more than a love tainted by deceit. I had built a life with passion, hard work, and ambition, and I wasn't willing to let that be defined by someone else's mistakes. With Mark's abandonment and Laura's desperate pleas echoing in the background, I made a choice that would forever alter the course of my life. I decided to move on, not out of bitterness, but out of a deep-seated need to reclaim my identity and my happiness. The betrayal had forced me to confront a painful truth. I deserved a partner who valued loyalty above fleeting infatuations, someone who understood that true love was built on honesty and respect. As I began the long, arduous journey of healing, I realized that moving forward meant embracing the lessons of the past without letting them define my future. I resolved to rebuild my life with a renewed sense of purpose, to focus on the relationships that uplifted me, and to invest in my own growth. In that quiet determination, I found the strength to let go of a love that had proven to be transient, and to step into a future where I was finally free from the chains of betrayal. The days turned into weeks after that devastating confrontation, and the echoes of betrayal still haunted every corner of my life. I had spent those long nights and solitary mornings questioning everything: my worth, my future, and the integrity of a love that had once seemed unbreakable. As the initial shock faded, a strange clarity began to emerge. I had to reclaim my life and rebuild my identity, free from the shadow of deception. Melissa's attempts to mend the relationship became increasingly desperate. Her calls grew more frequent, each one a mix of tearful apologies and frantic pleas. She would show up unannounced at our home, clutching bouquets of wilted flowers or scribbled notes that professed her undying love. At first, I'd listen, hoping that maybe her breakdown had sparked a genuine realization that she was truly remorseful and ready to fix what she had shattered. But every time, the memories of her betrayal, of that fateful night with our business partner, the evidence I'd found, and the unmistakable truth that she had willingly chosen another, surfaced like a tide I couldn't hold back. One afternoon, as I sat in my office immersed in work to distract myself, my phone buzzed with a message from her. It read, "John, I miss you so much. I can't live without you. Please, come home, I promise to change." I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling a mix of pity and sorrow. There was an undeniable vulnerability in her words, a raw, unfiltered plea that spoke of a woman who was broken by her own choices. And yet, despite the pain, I knew that reopening that door would only lead to more heartache. That evening, as twilight fell and the city lights began to twinkle, I returned home to an empty house. The silence was a stark contrast to the chaos of emotions that had consumed me over the past few weeks. I sat alone at the kitchen table, a cup of cold coffee my only companion, and reflected on everything that had happened. I remembered the man I once was, the one who believed in forever and fought for the sanctity of our vows. Now, I realized, that image had been irrevocably altered by betrayal. I had spent too long clinging to a love tainted by deceit. Melissa finally appeared at our doorstep later that night. She stood there, shivering in the cool air, her eyes red and puffy from crying. With trembling hands, she offered an apology I had heard countless times before. "John, I'm so sorry. I was so lost, and I made a terrible mistake. I thought I'd found true love with him, but it was all an illusion. I can't live without you, I need you to come back." Her voice cracked, and for a brief moment, I saw the genuine remorse in her expression. It was a far cry from the confident, seductive woman who had seduced him, and even seduced me with her lies. But as I looked into her eyes, I couldn't ignore the weight of what had happened. I recalled the countless nights spent reeling from the betrayal, the sleepless hours questioning my self-worth, and the growing realization that I had to forge a path that honored who I truly was. "Melissa," I said quietly, "I understand that you're hurting, and I truly regret that things turned out this way. But I've been through too much pain already. I can't simply undo what happened." She reached out, desperation in her eyes. "Please, John, let's try to fix this. I'll do anything, counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. I'm willing to change if you'll give me another chance." Her plea echoed in the silent room, each word laden with regret and longing. For a long, painful moment, I remained silent. The anger, the betrayal, the shattered trust, they all swirled inside me. I had made a choice long ago to move forward, to rebuild my life on a foundation of self-respect and healing. I had started to see that the relationship we once had was gone forever. "I'm sorry," I finally replied, my voice soft yet resolute. "I can't go back to how things were. I've begun to rebuild myself, and I need to keep moving forward." The rejection in her eyes was immediate, a mix of disbelief, sorrow, and regret. Melissa's shoulders slumped, and for a few moments, the world seemed to freeze. In that silence, I could almost hear the finality of our broken promises echoing through the room. I had reached a point of no return. Over the next several weeks, I immersed myself in the process of healing. I sought solace in the steady routine of my work and the quiet support of friends who reminded me of my worth. I started exploring hobbies and passions I had long neglected, running in the early mornings, painting on quiet weekends, and even taking up meditation. With each step I took, I felt the chains of betrayal loosen just a bit more. The anger that once threatened to consume me was slowly replaced by a determination to reclaim my life. I also began attending therapy sessions to untangle the complex web of emotions that had been woven around me since the affair. In those sessions, I learned that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the hurt Melissa had caused. It was about releasing myself from the burden of past pain. I realized that holding on to bitterness would only prevent me from embracing the future I deserved. With time, I started to see that moving on wasn't an act of weakness, but one of strength and self-love. Melissa's attempts to reach out became less frequent as time passed, and eventually, they ceased altogether. I received one final message from her, a simple, "I hope you find happiness," and I knew that our chapter had truly closed. I had chosen to build a new beginning, one that was defined by my own resilience rather than the shattered dreams of our past. Now, as I stand on the precipice of a new life, I can't help but feel a bittersweet relief. The scars of betrayal may remain, but they no longer control my destiny. I have learned that true love begins with self-respect and that the pain of the past can be transformed into the strength needed to forge a brighter future. In moving on, I have discovered that I am capable of healing, of growing, and of finding joy again, on my own terms. And so, with a heart that is both heavy with memories and light with newfound hope, I step forward into a future that promises healing, growth, and the freedom to be true to myself.